Welcome everyone. It is fall season, which means renewal season. Thank you for joining us today as we go into detail of what trucking permits are coming up for renewals and really what you need to do before January 1st, 2018. We love it when you ask questions. However, your phones are going to be muted during the webinar, so please submit your questions in the chat box. I'm Luke Kibbe. I'm going to be your moderator today. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat box, and if there's any questions that are put in there, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end, and I'll be sure to answer any of those questions, and Dave might be able to answer any of those questions as well. And if you don't have any questions, the Q&A session, again, just be sure to type in any questions that you might have, and we'll answer them. Also, you're going to be receiving the presentation and the link of the recording after the webinar. So please keep an eye on that in your email tomorrow. And with that, we're just going to go ahead and get started. So I'm happy to introduce Glostone's president, Dave Gray, and we're going to be going, again, chatting about what needs to be renewed before January 1st, 2018. So Dave, you can go ahead and take it away.
All right, so we're going to talk about renewals. This is a subject that is in high demand, especially this time of year, because of a lot of things renew. We're going to take a look at this at a high level. There are literally scores of things that you might need to be renewed, much of which depends on your type of operation and what state you are in. So we're going to cover the most common renewals and try to address more specific questions about your specific operation with you either typing in a question, or if it's you want to take it off of line, we're happy to have you send us an email and we can get back to you individually. So again, this is a kind of a high level overview, and we're going to break it up into what must be renewed. That's common to all states with everybody out there, and then there are things that could be renewed depending on the date and how your state operates. So those are the things that we need to double check and renew only if needed. So all right, so let's get into it. What must be renewed? So IFTA is common to all states, International Fuel Tax Agreement, and it applies to interstate carriers operating trucks over 26,000 pounds. So if you have trucks interstate operating at 26,000 pounds, or greater than 26,000 pounds, you should belong to IFTA and have an account set up with your base state. And so with the account set up in your base state, you renew it with your base state. So the fees for IFTA range, again, it varies by your base state, anywhere from $0 per truck up to $280 here in Oregon per truck. The fees vary a lot. The state legislatures kind of determine what these fees need to be, so it's impossible to sit here and give you a list of all 50 states and what each one would charge. So you'll need to check with your base state. If you're here in Oregon, with where we are located, first truck is $280, and then there's a graduated amount above that. So what do you need to carry in your truck? You need to carry a copy of the IFTA license. The IFTA license is about your company. It's not vehicle specific. Your license won't have the individual VIN numbers and such on your IFTA license, but the trucks should carry a copy of that IFTA license. In addition to the IFTA license, there is the decal, and the decals must be placed on the truck on each side of the door, so they can be visually seen as the truck goes through the weigh station. All right, so IFTA, next is UCR. UCR is common to all states, Unified Carrier Registration, and the UCR program is simply a revenue driving program to help fund safety programs. Probably, and I think the number is like 39 out of the 48 contiguous states belong to UCR. There are some states that don't belong. As with any federal program, There are strings attached to UCR money, so if a state belongs to UCR, they have to jump through some federal hoops in order to get that money, and there are some states that do not belong because they do not want to jump through those particular hoops and have chosen not to belong. So even though a state does not belong, it is still required to monitor and to enforce UCR. So for example, Oregon does not belong to UCR, but it enforces UCR. And who UCR applies to are any passenger property carrying vehicles operating interstate, as well as brokers and licensing companies. So again, property and passenger carrying vehicles that operate interstate must be registered with the UCR. So the fees are based on commercial vehicles. What the definition of a commercial vehicle is anything over 10,001 pounds is a commercial motor vehicle. And again, those vehicles must operate interstate in order to be part of having to register them with the UCR. It does not include trailers. Back in the first 2 years that UCR was implemented, they included trailers in these calculations, and that is no longer so. So it's only the trucks, not the trailers, that operate interstate over 10,001 pounds that must be registered through the UCR program. So what are the fees? The fees obviously are due even though your state may not be within the UCR program or receive any money back. So for example, Oregon, as I mentioned, does not belong to UCR, but Oregon carriers must register their trucks to the UCR through the UCR program. Several states have payment portals that you can go through to pay these fees. Oregon does not have one. The state of Indiana hosts a universal portal and that's the one we at Glostone use. So Indiana is a very common payment portal for UCR, and I think if you just Googled, UCR payments, the Indiana website would probably come up, and it will walk you through the process. All right, so what are the fees? And again, it's by number of trucks. And right now, today, they start at $76 for 0 to 2 trucks. And so how do you have 0 trucks? Well, again, UCR has to be paid by brokers. So they would have 0 trucks, but they still have to pay the UCR fee, so their fee would be $76. So in a carrier, if they had 1 or 2 trucks, it would be $76, and then it goes up from there. The good news, fees are being proposed to be reduced. The UCR program is a program initiated by Congress, and it was capped at an amount it cannot exceed. It cannot generate more than X amount of revenue, and for the first number of years it was not generating the revenue, so they left the fees alone. And last year, for the first time, it generated more than it was supposed to. It generated more revenue than the cap. So the FMCSA is proposing a 9% decrease in fees in order to make sure that the revenue collected is not over the cap. So the bad news part of that is UCR, the portal to pay for 2018 was supposed to be open October 1st, and so that you could start renewing right now. However, with the proposed fee change, they have postponed the renewal period from November 1st through December 31st. So you're going to have one less month in order to go through and do the UCR renewal, but your fees will be a bit cheaper. So anyway, stay tuned for a proposed decrease. Always good news, but the window to renew has been shortened starting November 1st. All right, what else? State tax account renewals must be renewed. Those states that have a mileage tax either in place of IFTA or in addition to IFTA typically need to be renewed. So the ones obviously for us here in Oregon is the Oregon Weight Mileage Tax account. So that tax account is in place of IFTA. Oregon carriers Oregon does not belong to IFTA. It provides an IFTA department where carriers can sign up for IFTA so that they can travel to the other states who do use IFTA. But when it comes to the tax collection, Oregon collects its taxes by the mile traveled based on the weight of the truck how it was registered with the state of Oregon. So it applies to trucks over 26,000 pounds operating in Oregon. Even if you're out of state and you come into Oregon, you have to have an Oregon weight tax account if you're over 26,000 pounds. So the account and permit that you get from Oregon is truck specific. It is going to, if you have 80 trucks, you're going to have 80 weight certificates. They call them an Oregon weight mileage tax identifier. You're going to get 80 of them, and they're going to be truck specific. They need to go in the truck that it belongs to. You can't mix and match these. They have to go into the specific truck for which they belong to. So you renew it with the Oregon Department of Transportation, the Motor Carrier Transportation Division, the MCTD, which is different than the DMV. So you cannot go to the DMV and get your state tax account renewals here in Oregon. You have to get it through the Motor Carrier Transportation Division. Fees have gone up. This year they're going to be $8.50 for a renewal. Last year they were at $8. So increase in price there. So if you're out of state, you'll pay $8.50. If you are an Oregon-based carrier that's leased on to another carrier, again $8.50. If you are a carrier that is operating under your own authority, this $8.50 will be included with your renewal for your plates and your tags. So you won't see a separate bill. It'll just be included in that bill if you're an Oregon-based carrier and you're operating under your own authority. So what to carry in the truck, make sure you carry that Oregon weight tax identifier. What that allows you to do, because Oregon doesn't care about fuel taxes through IFTA, they only care about taxes by the mile and how much distance you travel. They don't charge these trucks tax at the pump. So typically an Oregon motorist buying fuel in Oregon are going to pay a tax at the pump, but because these carriers who pay by the mile, they show this tax identifier, and that allows them to buy fuel without the tax. So they don't pay it twice. They don't pay it at the pump and through the weight mile tax account, only once through the weight mile tax account. Okay, next is New Mexico. New Mexico is a little bit different in Oregon. It does charge a mileage tax, but it is in addition to IFTA. So you're paying New Mexico, if you're a New Mexico-based carrier, you're paying your IFTA to New Mexico, plus you're paying a mileage tax on top of that. And if you're out of state and you travel through New Mexico, you need a New Mexico account. Again, applies to trucks 26,000 pounds or more. The renewal fee is $5.50 per truck. There is nothing to carry in the truck. It's all electronic. You come through New Mexico, they scan your truck, your plate. If you're not registered, it's a ticket. And I'll jump back to Oregon here just for a minute. If you're caught in January, they give out many, many tickets in January to carriers coming into the state without a Oregon weight mileage tax identifier, and the ticket's $460. So you don't want to be caught without these state tax identifiers. On the screen I've got New York HUT. It is also a mileage tax. However, New York, being New York, does things a little bit differently. And their renewals are called a series, and a series may be 2 years, it may be 3 years. Currently, we're in the middle of a series that is not needing to be renewed. So this year, New York HUT, if you've got a New York mileage tax account, it does not need to be renewed. Don't need to worry about that one. All right. Let's start talking about some things to double check and renew if needed. And we'll start with truck registration and tags. Again, if you're here in Oregon, this is a must renew by December 31st and have done by January 1st because it'll start being enforced. But other states have different systems. And if you're from another state, you may not need to register your renew your tags and plates right now, depending on the dates. So in the registration world, it's called staggered registration or set registration. For example, Oregon has a set registration. Everything expires December 31st in commercial truck plates and tags. It goes for 1 year, and it is a set specific date. Other states like Washington, they have a staggered registration. So you register your truck for the first time, maybe it's in May. And so your registration goes from May through the following April and then renews again the following May. So it's staggered registration. If you add trucks to your staggered registration fleet, they fall into that same fleet and are renewed at the same time. So if you put on a second truck, in the state of Washington, in June, it would only pay June fees through that April time period, and so forth. So your truck, your plates and your tags, it depends on whether you're staggered or set. And again, I think most folks on the line are probably Oregon-based, since how we are here in Oregon. Every truck registration expires December 31st and needs to be renewed. So what else do you need to know about renewing and double checking? Well, there's a difference. You need to know the difference between commercial registration versus apportioned registration. Commercial registration is for trucks under 26,000 pounds and for trucks over 26,000 pounds that are intra-state only. They never leave the state. And you pay the fees for commercial registration are based on weight. If you're going to register an 80,000 pound truck commercially, meaning it's never going to leave the state, you're going to pay 100% of Oregon's fees at the 80,000 pound rate, which is somewhere in the $900 and some odd range. Apportioned registration is for interstate travel. If your truck is if it's over 26,000 pounds and it's going to travel interstate, you need a apportioned registration. An apportioned registration means that the fees are apportioned to the states that you operate in or operated in last year, because you're paying fees. The fees that you pay this year are based on the distance you traveled last year. And we'll talk about fees more in just a minute for apportioned vehicles. So where do you renew? And again, it's going to depend on the state. Here in Oregon, commercial registration can be done at the DMV, where apportioned registration must be done through the Motor Carrier Division. Other states operate differently, and similar with IFTA. IFTA in some states is considered a tax and is collected by the Department of Revenue, where registration is collected by the DOT side of the state. But in Oregon, it's a combined shop, so both IFTA and registration fees are collected by the same department for the apportion fees. So it really varies by state. You need to look up your state to find out where you need to renew. Texas fees, you're going to pay 20% of New Mexico's and 20% of Arizona's. So, and they'll add those together, and that's what your fee is going to be. So how much will those fees be? And it's going to vary greatly. And I'll give you an example just based on the scenario I just gave you. So Texas, 80,000 pound apportioned fee is $960. Arizona, their apportioned fee for an 80,000 pound truck is like $2,900. So in the example, 60% of the fees from Texas, or distance was in Texas, you're going to pay 60% of $960 and of Arizona's $2,900. If it was reversed, if 60% of the distance was in Arizona, you'd pay $600 of $2,900 and only 20% of the $960 in the distance in Texas. So your fees can vary greatly depending on where you traveled. And should also mention that the records need to match. If you turn in a portion distance, the state that you turn it into, they're going to compare it against what you turned in for IFTA. And if the distances don't match, that's a huge red flag. So for example, if you're that Texas carrier, but you traveled 60% of your distance in Arizona, but you kind of say, well, I'm just going to say that I traveled 60% of my distance in Texas instead, so I get a cheaper rate. Well, if that becomes immediately flagged, if they start comparing your numbers, and once flagged, obviously they're not too happy about that, and it can result in some pretty substantial fines. So you want to make sure that the numbers that you use to renew your fleet as far as distance are the same numbers that you used for IFTA. Those need to be accurate because they will audit those. Okay, so what do you need to carry in the truck, or what you're going to get back for each vehicle registered is a cab card, 8.5, usually it's 8.5 by 11, depending on the state. I think most states have gone to that now. So a cab card is truck specific. It needs to be inside the right truck. And you need the current year tags on the plate. All right, let's move on to the next slide. And hazmat. Hopefully, if you haul hazmat, you're well aware of what's needed in the way of permits, because this is obviously very sensitive cargo that everybody gets excited about, especially in the enforcement area. So if you do haul hazmat, hopefully this is very old news to you, but you'll need a federal hazmat permit. You apply for that to the federal or to the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. It does not need to be renewed. If you have one, it does not need to be renewed because they expire. They're a one-year time frame, July 1st through June 30th. But if you do haul hazmat, make sure you've got one. And I believe you can. The cost for 1 year is $275, and you can buy multi-year permits through the federal program. So make sure you have that permit. There's other states, individual states have individual rules when it comes to hazmat. For example, Oregon, what all they care about is that you have the federal permit. So if you haul hazmat in Oregon, as long as you have the federal permit, you're good to go. However, Idaho has their own permit. So if you travel in Oregon, you need the federal permit, and if you travel with hazmat into Idaho, you will need their permit before you get there. There's also an alliance of 4 different states. I think it's Michigan, Nevada, Oklahoma, and West Virginia. They kind of belong to a consortium where they handle their hazmat as one place to go. You can get the permit for any one of those states through this alliance program. But the fees vary by state, and it all depends on where you want to go. So if you're hauling hazmat, make sure you do your research about where you're going to travel before you get there and get your permits. And it's very important that your hazmat driver, the driver of your truck hauling hazmat, has a CDL that's endorsed with a hazmat endorsement. It's a special endorsement that has to go on the license, meaning that driver was trained sufficiently in how to haul hazmat. I think the worst problems that come up with hazmat are those carriers that only occasionally haul hazmat. They'll pick it up every once in a while, or they'll pick up a load that they didn't realize was hazmat, and all of a sudden it's on their truck, and now they have no permits, and that leads to big trouble. Okay, enough about hazmat. What else is there? Other things to be aware of: oversize, overweight permits. For overweight, anything over 80,000 pounds, typically in a state requires its own separate permit. Oversize being over height, over width, over length. Those are all permits that are needed if that applies to your operation. And when do those permits expire? They're staggered. Depends on when you bought them in most states, and you just need to make sure that you're tracking the expiration dates. Many carriers order new ones when they renew and register for their plates and the tags, so they expire at the same time they know to go renew them. That's not necessarily so. If you have a fleet with 50 trucks and you've got 40 different oversized overweight permits that you use, they could all expire at different times. So you want to make sure that you control those very, very closely, because if you get caught with an expired permit, again, it's very costly. Some other things to look at. MCS 150 update. That's updating your US DOT statistics to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. They require an update every 2 years. And when they want you to update it is based on your US DOT number. There's depends on the digits, and the digits tell what month, what if it's an even or an odd year, you're supposed to update. So if you've got a question about when you should update your particular US DOT information, shoot us an email with your US DOT number, and we can tell you exactly what years and months you're supposed to renew that. The FMCSA can now fine folks for not updating their information and keeping it updated every 2 years. And the reason it's so important to them is these statistics, this data that you put into the MCS 150 update is the data that they use, the feds use, within the CSA measurement program. So the number of trucks, number of drivers, all that information needs to be updated so that they are measuring you correctly against other carriers of similar size. So they really want you to make sure that it stays updated. So it's a good thing to double check, make sure that it's been done. Another common item that is forgotten about until it becomes an issue. Obviously, if you're in business, you need to have your business name or a business license registered with your home state. Secretary of State usually is the office that handles that. And typically they need to be renewed, and some of them are annually, some of them are every a couple of years. So you need to check to make sure your business name is renewed. And why is that important? Well, when you go to register your trucks through commercial or apportioned and get your new plates and tags, they are going to check your business name to make sure you are a legal entity within that state. And if you're not, all of that is held up until you get your business name and business license renewed. So make sure it's done before you get into the renewal process. Heavy vehicle use tax is another commonly forgot item. Again, it expires the end of July, so it should already be renewed. But if you have not renewed, when you go to renew your trucks for your plates and your tags, they are going to check to see if you are current on your heavy vehicle use tax for that particular vehicle. And if you are not, you will not be allowed to renew it. So heavy vehicle use tax applies to trucks that are 55,000 pounds and over. It's paid to the IRS. You need proof from the IRS that you paid it. You'll need to turn in that proof when you renew your fleet of trucks that are over 55,000 pounds. So, and again, if you don't have it, you don't have that proof, the renewal stops and they wait until you can provide that proof. Another common renewal is the Standard Carrier Alpha Code, SCAC code, and that really only applies mostly to carriers that haul Department of Defense loads. The military requires it, and if you haul into Canada, Canadian provinces want that. And really, it is kind of just another way of identifying you as a carrier and ask some different information. Again, kind of an identity type of thing. It does need to be renewed, so you'll need to make sure if you've got one and it's required that you have it because of your loads that you haul, make sure that you stay on top of that renewal. If you haul alcohol requires permits in different states. So again, if you're a common carrier and alcohol is part of your loads, hopefully you're familiar with the permits in the state that you operate in, because that varies greatly by state. If you travel into Canada, Canadian authority permits expire and typically staggered, so you'll need to pay attention to those dates as well. All right. That is most of the common renewals. And now is a good time to maybe throw in a couple of cautionary things as you get into your renewal process. And now would be a good time to send in your questions if you'd like something answered within this webinar. And then we'll try to address it. So let's go through some of the cautionary things. For your sanity, sooner is better when it comes to renewals, especially if you're in a state such as Oregon, where every truck license plate, every Oregon-based license plate expires on the same day. So you can imagine what that does to the Department of Transportation division that renews all of this stuff. It's a huge deadline, and the closer you get to the deadline, the busier it becomes. The last week, it's not uncommon to stand for 2 hours in line waiting for your turn to get up to the counter to renew your truck. So you do it through the mail, but again, if you wait until that last week, even the mail rooms and the people that process it behind the scenes are slammed with business. So they're not only renewing plates and tags, but they're renewing IFTA, and they're renewing, UCR in a lot of cases, and overweight permits. And so the sooner you can get into the renewal process and get it paid, the better. Certainly understand there's money involved and cash flow, and nobody really wants to get out and pay a bunch of money way ahead of time, but you don't want to wait to the last minute either. So just kind of a word of caution there. If you're one of those folks that are considering an entity change, you should renewal process now. And what I mean by entity change, for example, if you're Dave Gray Trucking sole proprietor and your accountant tells you that, well, you should really be an S Corp. You should change your entity type. You should be Dave Gray Trucking Corporation. You need to start that process now because it's not as simple as it sounds. If I want to change my company name to Dave Gray Trucking Corporation, I've got to start with the IRS and get my entity changed there. I've got to go to the state and get my business name updated so that it has that corporation on there. I've got to go to the truck registration for my apportioned plates. That name has to have that incorporated and on the name change for that. My IFTA license has to be changed. The UCR has to be changed. All of those steps have to be done with your entity change. And we constantly here at Glostone get folks that wait until the last 2 weeks and say, oh, by the way, I want to change my name of my company. I want to add this, or I want to change the name completely. And everything has to be started over again. And if you're trying to do it within that busy season, the chances of it happening on time are slim to none. So if you are considering an entity change, make sure you start sooner than later. Another common question, is there a grace period to renew? And I'll say there is no grace period to renew. There is a grace period to display with IFTA. So IFTA does offer a display grace period. And what I mean by that is they allow, I believe it's to March 15th, in order to put your IFTA sticker on the side of the truck and get the IFTA license into the truck. The reason that they allow that grace period to display is because obviously there are some large fleets with trucks all over the country, and it takes time to get those permits and the decals out to those individual trucks. In addition, there's trucks up there in the north where it is so cold in January that the stickers or the decals don't stick to the side of the truck, and by waiting till a little later in the year when it warms up just a little bit, they get better adhesion. And so IFTA allows a grace period to display but not to renew, meaning that you need to pay your fees before December 31st, but they will allow a little bit of grace period to get them actually out to the trucks and on the trucks. But the payment has to be paid. And again, every year we have folks that, well, I know there's a grace period, so I'm not going to pay until March 1st. Well, you still got to go back and you got to pay the full fees. And if you're caught in that time period between January and March where you haven't put on your sticker or your decal and they see that you haven't paid your fees, you're in for a ticket, a violation. So, and then lastly, there are spam emails out there. You need to watch out for those. We've just received a few already on UCR where you've got these companies out there saying you're overdue, you're in violation, you haven't renewed your UCR, or and there's other scams out there. And again, UCR doesn't open up, the portal doesn't even open up until November 1st, and usually these emails are scams, and you're paying a very premium price to have them renew your UCRs for you. And sometimes they throw you into automatic renewal where they charge you to renew it for next year as well, because the fine print says that you will renew with them ongoing until in writing that you say you don't want to use them. So be careful, be cautious of those spam emails. They are out there. Okay, so we're at that point. How can we help Glostone? Heather and her team work with these renewals constantly and are very adept at being able to get through the red tape, get it done in a very a time frame where we can get the credentials back to you. So if you need help in getting your renewals done, just give us a call. Glad to help. So with that, I guess I need to turn it back over to Luke, and if there's questions, we're happy to answer them. If you'd like to wait and send us a question via email where we can take on your specific operation and talk to you individually, we're happy to do that as well. So again, my thanks, and Luke, back to you.
Awesome. So again, if there are any questions, feel free to please type them in real quick. We'll give you just a little bit to do so. I do want to thank Dave for the presentation. There's a lot of great information in there, and definitely just brings the awareness of how much stuff might be coming up for you guys needing renewal. I'm not seeing any questions or anybody typing any questions. If there are some, I'll be sure to go back to it. But I do want to mention a couple of things. If you are a driver and happen to drive through Oregon, or actually if you're just a resident, if you just are an Oregonian in general, this might be valuable to you. But we have a free video we put together on the new distracted driving law that came out and started October 2017, beginning of this month, on what you can or cannot do with your smartphone or electronic devices while driving. And we actually cover a lot of the details on this electronic distracted driving law. So this is good for your drivers, for your staff to know about. We go over the fines, what that looks like, and just, again, all the details of what you might be allowed or not allowed to do regarding using your smartphone. Short answer is basically while driving or even stopped at a stoplight, you can't do too much. So be sure to check that video out. I'll send out a link via email with the recording of this and presentation, and with the PDF slides of the presentation as well. So you can go check that out. If you do like that video, you can fill out the form on the landing page there when you're watching the video. We have a full defensive driving training video course that we've created. It's got like 6 videos on defensive driving. That's great for specifically for commercial drivers. So if you're fleet management, then it's something to good just pass on as a refresher course. If you have issues with defensive driving in your fleet, it's just another good way to get them to see a video to keep them updated and just thinking about defensive driving as a truck driver. And Also, just because it is really like 60 days away, in fact, it's the 17th, so 62 days away from December 18th, the ELD deadline. If you haven't finished your research process or haven't gotten an ELD yet, if you need one, be sure to check out what we've looked up for you guys. We have we're a reseller of GeoTab. It's a fantastic customizable electronic logging device. It's simple, it's affordable, and it's something that you can customize from just as an owner-operator all the way up to large fleets. We have some large fleets that we work with that use GeoTab and have found it being very successful. So if you want to check that out, it's glostone.com/geotab for more information. And if you just want to email me just on, am I qualified am I supposed to have an ELD in my vehicle based on the ELD mandate? Just email us, email me, or reply to me when I send out the email. I've written like 16 articles, 17 articles on the ELD mandate, everything from the research phase to implementing, how to implement it to your drivers, and what is roadside enforcement going to look like, and much, much more. So be sure to reach out to me and I can send you those resources, other webinars that we've done, and what have you. So again, there is no more questions, it looks like, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this webinar. Thank you again for attending. I'll send out the information. Look for that either at the end of the day today or tomorrow morning in your emails for the recording. Hopefully we'll see you next week or next month at our next webinar. I don't think we have one up yet, so I'll let you guys know too when that's coming up. Have a great rest of your day and week.